Everyone talks about the bliss of awakening, the peace, the clarity, the freedom. But what they don't tell you is that spiritual awakening can tear your life apart. It can leave you feeling more lost than you've ever felt before. And today, we're going to talk about the parts of this journey that nobody wants to admit exist. You see, we've been sold this idea that spiritual awakening is like flipping a switch. One day you're asleep, the next day you're enlightened, and everything is suddenly perfect. But that's not how it works. The truth is far more complex, far more challenging, and if you're not prepared for it, it can shake you to your core. What happens when you wake up and realize that everything you thought mattered doesn't matter at all? What happens when you can no longer connect with the people you once loved because you've changed so fundamentally? What happens when the goals you spent years chasing suddenly feel empty and meaningless? These are the questions nobody asks. These are the shadows of awakening that most spiritual teachers conveniently skip over. But here's the thing. If you're going through this, if you're feeling like you're falling apart instead of coming together, you're not broken, you're not doing it wrong. You might actually be doing it right. And understanding this dark side might be the most important thing you learn on your entire spiritual path. So let's talk about what really happens when you wake up. Let's talk about the isolation, the confusion, the loss, and yes, even the depression that can come with spiritual awakening. Because only when we understand the full picture can we truly navigate this journey with wisdom and grace. The reason this matters is simple. Right now, thousands of people are going through spiritual awakenings and thinking something is wrong with them. They're comparing their experience to the sanitized versions they see online, and they're feeling like failures. They're wondering why they're not floating in a constant state of bliss. They're questioning whether they've made a terrible mistake by opening this door, and the silence around these struggles only makes it worse. So let's break that silence. Let's explore the 4 major challenges of spiritual awakening that nobody wants to talk about. And more importantly, let's understand why these challenges are not obstacles to be avoided, but essential parts of the transformation itself. The collapse of your old identity. The first dark aspect of spiritual awakening is something that sounds simple but feels devastating when it happens. Your old identity begins to collapse. And I'm not talking about a gentle transformation where you slowly grow into a new version of yourself. I'm talking about a complete dismantling of who you thought you were. Think about it for a moment. Your entire life, you've been building an identity. You've been collecting labels and attaching them to yourself. You're a student or a professional. You're a parent or a partner. You're successful or struggling. You're confident or insecure. You have political beliefs, religious views, opinions about everything. You have preferences, habits, routines. You have a story about yourself that you tell yourself and others every single day. This identity feels solid. It feels real. It feels like who you actually are. But then awakening happens, and you start to see through it. You begin to recognize that all of these labels, all of these stories, they're just constructs. They're ideas. They're thoughts you've been thinking for so long that they've become invisible to you. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. When you see through your identity, you can't just unsee it. It's like watching a magic trick and then seeing how it's done. The illusion is broken. You can't go back to believing in it with the same conviction you once had. But society doesn't care about your awakening. Your job still expects you to show up as the professional you were. Your family still expects you to play the role you've always played. Your friends still relate to you based on the person they think you are. And suddenly you're trapped between 2 worlds. You're trying to maintain an identity that no longer feels true, while simultaneously being unable to fully step into whatever is emerging. This creates a profound sense of disorientation. You might find yourself going through the motions of your life while feeling like you're watching someone else do it. You might feel like an actor playing a role, except you forgot your lines and you're not even sure what play you're in anymore. Everything that once felt automatic now feels forced. Everything that once gave you a sense of self now feels hollow. And the scary part, you don't immediately get a new identity to replace the old one. There's a gap, a void, a period where you're nobody. Or at least it feels that way. You're not who you were, but you're also not yet who you're becoming. You're in between, you're undefined. And humans don't do well with being undefined. This is why so many people in the midst of awakening experience what looks like a midlife crisis, even if they're nowhere near midlife. They quit their jobs, they end relationships, they move to new cities. They're desperately trying to fill that void with a new identity, a new story, something to hold on to. But the real challenge is learning to be comfortable in that undefined space, learning to exist without needing to know exactly who you are. The old wisdom traditions understood this. They talked about the death of the ego, but they didn't mean it metaphorically. They meant it literally. When your old self dies, you grieve. You go through all the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And nobody told you that spiritual awakening would involve grieving the death of yourself. What makes this even harder is that you can't explain it to people who haven't experienced it. How do you tell your partner that you don't know who you are anymore? How do you explain to your parents that the life path they supported you on suddenly feels meaningless? How do you tell your friends that you can't engage in the same conversations because the person who used to have those opinions doesn't exist anymore? You can't, or at least you can't in a way that they'll understand. So you often end up feeling isolated, misunderstood, and alone. You might start to withdraw from social situations because pretending to be your old self is exhausting. But revealing your current state of uncertainty is too vulnerable. And here's something nobody tells you. Sometimes this phase lasts a long time. It's not a quick transition. Some people spend years in this undefined space, slowly allowing a more authentic way of being to emerge. But in our fast-paced world, where we're supposed to have everything figured out, years of not knowing who you are feels like failure. But it's not failure, it's transformation. And transformation is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly by feeling great the whole time. It literally dissolves into goo inside the cocoon. Complete dissolution before reformation. That's what's happening to you. You're the goo, and that's okay. The question becomes, can you allow yourself to be undefined? Can you resist the urge to immediately create a new identity just to feel safe? Can you sit in the discomfort of not knowing who you are, trusting that something true will emerge from that space? Because that's the real work. Not creating a new spiritual identity to replace your old one, but learning to be beyond identity altogether. The loneliness of seeing differently. The second dark side of awakening is the profound loneliness that comes when your perception of reality shifts, and nobody around you can relate to what you're seeing. This isn't just feeling lonely because you're alone. This is feeling lonely while surrounded by people. It's the loneliness of seeing the world in a completely different way than everyone else in your life. Before awakening, you and the people around you were living in the same reality. You had shared assumptions about what matters, about how life works, about what's true and what's not. You could talk about your problems and they understood. You could share your excitements and they celebrated with you. There was a common ground, a shared language, a mutual understanding of the game everyone was playing. But awakening changes the game, or more accurately, it shows you that the game is just a game. And once you see it, you can't pretend it's ultimate reality anymore. You start to see how much of what people stress about is based on assumptions that aren't necessarily true. You see how much suffering is self-created. You see patterns and cycles that repeat endlessly. You see the ways people trap themselves without realizing it. And at first, maybe you try to share these insights. Maybe you try to help people see what you're seeing. But what happens? They look at you like you've grown a second head. They think you're being weird, or preachy, or going through some kind of phase. They might even get defensive, because what you're saying threatens their worldview. So you learn to stay quiet. You learn to keep your observations to yourself. But staying quiet comes with its own pain. When you're having a realization about the nature of existence, and you can't share it with anyone, it feels isolating. When everyone around you is worried about things that you now recognize as temporary and ultimately unimportant, you can't fully engage with their concerns. You can empathize, yes. You can be compassionate, absolutely. But you can no longer relate to those concerns as if they're the most important things in the world. This creates a distance. Your conversations become more superficial because the depths you want to explore are not depths others want to visit. Your relationships start to feel less intimate because there's a huge part of your experience that you can't share. You're going through the most profound transformation of your life, and you're going through it alone. Some people respond to this by seeking out spiritual communities. They go to meditation groups, workshops, retreats. They hope to find others who speak their language. And sometimes this helps. But sometimes it just reveals another problem, because spiritual communities have their own issues. There can be competition about who's more enlightened. There can be judgment if you're not practicing the right way. There can be spiritual bypassing where real problems get dismissed with phrases like "just let go," or "it's all an illusion." So you might find yourself feeling lonely even in spiritual spaces, because you're not looking for a new club to join. You're not looking for a new identity as a spiritual person. You're looking for genuine connection with someone who understands the strange territory you're navigating, and that's rare. What makes this loneliness even deeper is that you can't go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't force yourself to care about things that no longer resonate with you just to fit in. You can't pretend that the emperor is wearing clothes when you clearly see he's naked. So you're stuck, too awake to connect with your old world, but not yet established enough in a new way of being to feel grounded. And here's what nobody tells you about this phase. It changes your relationships. Sometimes it ends them. That friend group you've had for years, you might drift apart. That romantic relationship that was working fine, it might not survive one person waking up while the other stays asleep. Your family might not understand why you've changed, and you might find yourself having to choose between being authentic and being accepted. These are real losses. They hurt, and the spiritual platitudes don't help. Saying everything happens for a reason doesn't ease the pain of losing people you love. Saying you're evolving beyond them sounds arrogant and doesn't capture the genuine grief of outgrowing relationships that once meant everything to you. But here's the truth that emerges from this loneliness. You start to develop a different kind of relationship with yourself. When there's nobody else to turn to, when nobody else can truly understand what you're experiencing, you're forced to become your own companion. You're forced to trust your own perception. You're forced to validate your own experience, rather than seeking validation externally. And in that forced solitude, something interesting happens. You discover that the loneliness isn't really about being alone. It's about the expectation that someone outside of you should complete you, should understand you fully, should make you feel less alone. But awakening reveals that even in the closest relationships, we're still separate beings having our own experiences. The sense of merging with another person is beautiful, but it's also temporary and partial. The loneliness of awakening is teaching you that you are, in a fundamental sense, alone. Not in a sad way, but in a factual way. You're a single point of consciousness experiencing reality through one particular perspective. Nobody can climb inside your skull and see exactly what you see. And trying to escape this fundamental aloneness through relationships or community is part of what keeps us asleep. So the dark gift of this loneliness is that it pushes you toward a deeper relationship with existence itself. When people can't fill the void, you have to find another way. And that way usually involves directly experiencing your connection to something larger than your individual self, not as a concept, but as a lived reality. You start to feel held by existence itself. You start to sense that you're not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. And in that recognition, the loneliness transforms into solitude, which is a completely different experience. Loneliness is feeling cut off and wanting connection. Solitude is being alone and feeling whole. And the journey from one to the other is painful, but it's necessary, because you can't have authentic connection with others until you've found authentic connection with yourself and with existence. Everything else is just two separate people trying to use each other to escape their separateness, the meaninglessness that comes before meaning. The third dark side of awakening is perhaps the most disturbing for many people. It's the phase where everything loses meaning. All the goals you were chasing, all the achievements you valued, all the things you thought mattered, suddenly they all feel empty, pointless. Like you've been running on a hamster wheel your whole life, and you just now realized it's going nowhere. This is different from depression, although it can look similar from the outside. Depression says nothing matters, and feels heavy and dark about it. This is more like nothing matters, and you're just observing that fact with strange clarity. It's not emotional, at least not at first. It's just a recognition, a seeing through the structures of meaning that society has built. You start to question everything. Why am I working so hard to climb this career ladder? Why does it matter if I'm successful by society's standards? Why am I trying to accumulate wealth, status, possessions? What's the point of any of it? You look at people rushing around, stressed and anxious, chasing goals and running from fears, and you see it all as absurd. Like watching ants build an anthill just to have it swept away by the rain, only to build it again. The problem is, you can't just intellectually understand that life is meaningless, and then cheerfully continue living as if it's meaningful. That's called compartmentalization. And awakening doesn't let you do that. When you really see that the meanings you've been living by are constructed, arbitrary, and ultimately hollow, you can't keep operating within those structures with the same energy and commitment. So what happens? You lose motivation. You stop caring about things you used to care about. Your ambition evaporates. Your drive disappears. People around you might accuse you of being lazy or depressed or giving up. But from your perspective, you're not giving up. You're just not participating in the collective delusion anymore. You're refusing to pretend that arbitrary goals are inherently important. This phase can be really dangerous if you're not careful, because when nothing matters, it's easy to slide into nihilism. It's easy to become bitter and cynical. It's easy to judge everyone else for being caught up in meaningless pursuits, while you sit back feeling superior in your recognition of meaninglessness. And that's a trap. That's not awakening. That's just the ego finding a new position to defend. The real challenge of this phase is to sit with the meaninglessness without either denying it or getting stuck in it. To look directly at the fact that there is no inherent meaning in the universe, and to not flinch away from that. To not immediately try to create new spiritual meanings to replace the old worldly ones. To actually experience the void. And here's what's really happening in this phase. Your old sources of meaning are dying, but the new way of relating to life hasn't been born yet. You're in between. The goals that used to motivate you were based on the belief that achieving them would make you happy, complete, worthy, but awakening shows you that nothing external can do that. No achievement, no possession, no status, no relationship can give you what you're really looking for. So those goals lose their power over you, which is good. That's freedom. But it feels terrible because you don't know what to do with yourself without those goals. You've been conditioned your entire life to be goal-oriented, to be striving for something, to measure your worth by your achievements. And now all of that has collapsed and you're just floating in space with no direction. What nobody tells you is that this is necessary. This emptying out has to happen. You have to lose all the false meanings before you can discover what, if anything, is truly meaningful. You have to stop seeking happiness in all the wrong places before you can find it where it actually exists. You have to give up the search before you can discover what you've been searching for was here all along. But knowing that intellectually doesn't make the experience easier. When you're in it, it feels like everything you worked for was a waste. It feels like you've lost years of your life chasing illusions. It feels like everyone else has it figured out except you. And the worst part is that you can't go back to believing in the illusions even if you wanted to. You're stuck in this space of seeing through everything, but not yet seeing into anything. The way through this phase is not to try to create new meanings. That's just the mind doing what it always does, filling the void with concepts. The way through is to allow yourself to be meaningless for a while, to live without a grand purpose, to do things simply because you're doing them, not because they lead somewhere or prove something or accomplish anything. And slowly, if you can stay with this, something interesting happens. A different kind of meaning emerges. Not meaning that you create or meaning that society imposes, but meaning that's inherent in existence itself. The meaning of a flower blooming is not in what the flower achieves. It's in the blooming itself. The meaning of water flowing is in the flowing. The meaning of life living is in the living. You start to discover that meaning doesn't come from achieving goals or fulfilling purposes. It comes from being fully present with what is. It comes from engaging wholeheartedly with life, not because it leads somewhere, but because this is what you are. This is what's happening. And there's nothing else more real than this moment right now. But you can't rush to this realization. You have to earn it by going through the desert of meaninglessness first. You have to lose everything before you can find the nothing that contains everything. And that journey through the desert is dark, uncomfortable, and most people want to turn back before they make it through to the other side. The responsibility of seeing clearly. The fourth and final dark side we need to talk about is the burden of responsibility that comes with awakening. And this is subtle because it doesn't look like the other challenges. It's not about loss or loneliness or meaninglessness. It's about what happens after you start to see clearly. It's about what you do with that clarity. When you wake up, you begin to see how much of human suffering is optional. You see how people create their own problems through their thinking, their attachments, their resistance to reality. You see how much pain comes from wanting things to be different than they are. You see how much conflict arises from people defending positions they don't even really believe in. You see how much of life is spent running from fear or chasing fantasies, instead of being present with what actually is. And once you see all this, you can't claim ignorance anymore. You can't participate in creating unnecessary suffering without being aware that you're doing it. Every time you complain, you know you're choosing to resist what is. Every time you get angry, you know you're choosing that reaction. Every time you feel like a victim, you know you're choosing that perspective. And that awareness brings responsibility. This is what makes awakening difficult in a completely different way than the previous challenges. The other challenges were about what was happening to you. This one is about what you're doing to yourself and others, and there's no one else to blame anymore. You can't say I didn't know better. You do know better. You've seen through the mechanics of suffering, and now you're responsible for whether you continue to participate in those mechanics or not. This responsibility extends beyond just your own suffering. When you see clearly, you also see how your actions affect others. You see how your words create ripples. You see how your energy influences the people around you. You see how much power you actually have to either add to the suffering in the world or to alleviate it. And you can't unsee that power. You can't pretend you're powerless anymore. And here's where it gets really uncomfortable, Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say no. Sometimes the most compassionate action is to set a boundary. Sometimes you have to let people be angry with you or disappointed in you because participating in their drama would be enabling their suffering. But society doesn't teach us this. Society teaches us to be nice, to go along, to keep the peace. An awakening asks you to prioritize truth over comfort, yours and everyone else's. This creates conflict. When you stop playing the old games, people get upset. When you stop pretending, people feel threatened. When you stop sacrificing your truth to maintain relationships, those relationships either transform or end, and you're the one who has to live with those consequences. Nobody gives you a medal for being awake. Nobody thanks you for seeing clearly. More often, people resent you for it. So you face this constant choice. Do you speak your truth and risk the consequences? Or do you stay quiet and feel like you're betraying yourself? Do you act from your understanding and potentially upset people? Or do you go along with what's expected and feel like you're sleepwalking? There's no easy answer, and the responsibility of making these choices, moment after moment, day after day, can be exhausting. What makes this even harder is that you still make mistakes. Awakening doesn't mean you become perfect. You still have conditioning, patterns, wounds. You still react sometimes. You still fall back asleep. But now when you do, you're aware of it. You watch yourself doing the thing you know better than to do, and that creates its own kind of suffering. The suffering of seeing yourself clearly and not always liking what you see. And you can't use awakening as an excuse anymore. You can't say, I was unconscious. I didn't know what I was doing. When you hurt someone, you knew. When you acted from fear, you knew. When you chose comfort over truth, you knew. That's the burden of consciousness. It doesn't let you hide from yourself. But here's what this challenge is really asking of you. It's asking you to grow up, to stop expecting life to be easy or fair, to stop waiting for someone to save you or tell you what to do, to stop blaming your problems on your past or your circumstances, to take full ownership of your experience and your actions, not in a harsh, self-judging way, but in a mature, this is my life and I'm responsible for it way. And when you truly accept that responsibility, something shifts. The burden becomes lighter because you're no longer fighting against it. You're no longer wishing things were different. You're just responding to what is with as much clarity and compassion as you can in each moment. And when you fall short, you're just responding to that with clarity and compassion too. The responsibility of awakening is ultimately the responsibility of being fully human, of bringing consciousness to a world that desperately needs it, of being a light not because you're special or enlightened, but simply because you've stopped hiding from your own awareness. And yes, that's a burden, but it's also the most meaningful way to live. Not meaningful in the sense of achieving something grand, but meaningful in the sense of being authentic, present, and engaged with life exactly as it is. So there you have it, the 4 dark sides of spiritual awakening that nobody wants to talk about. The collapse of your old identity, the loneliness of seeing differently, the meaninglessness that comes before meaning, and the responsibility of seeing clearly. These aren't side effects or problems to be solved. They're integral parts of the awakening process itself. And if you're going through any of these challenges right now, know that you're not alone. Know that you're not broken. Know that what you're experiencing is a natural part of waking up from the dream of separation into the reality of what you actually are. It's not supposed to be comfortable. It's supposed to be transformative. The spiritual path is not about escaping life or transcending humanity. It's about becoming more fully alive, more fully human, more fully present. And that requires letting go of everything that isn't real, even when those illusions felt like home. It requires walking through darkness to discover that you are the light you were looking for. It requires losing yourself to find yourself. And that's the great paradox that no amount of words can capture. only direct experience. If you found this helpful, subscribe for more explorations into the reality of awakening.